Hi Booktube, and welcome to a new video. This is a Friday Reads for 3 books. We have Little Scratch by Rebecca Watson, Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, and Poetry Daylight by Roya Marsh. So I'm going to start with Little Scratch. So this is definitely on the experimental wing in terms of layout, but there is a purpose to it, and one that I very much approve of. So this is about a young woman in London who has been sexually assaulted at work but has told no one, and is still at that office, still works there. She hasn't been able to summon up the will to overcome her trauma, to share the knowledge with other people, and equally hasn't been able to, remove herself from the office. And obviously there's arguments on both sides of that, in the sense of why should she be the one who have to give up her means to earn a living. But the problem is she hasn't reported the guy who's assaulted her, so no one knows that he's still working there when he shouldn't be, or he should be on suspension. It starts off with extraordinary immersion of the reader through this writing style of her waking up in the morning when her phone alarm has gone off so that she can get up and go to work. But it's so involved in her body, in the sense of it describes the sort of the sensation of the blood coming back. Feeling, it's always obviously been in your veins, but that sense of being aware of it pulsing as you awake, dozing for another 10 minutes before the alarm goes off again and wakes you up. So it's this gradual rising of a body, and you're really experiencing that at the sort of cellular and molecular level. It's brilliantly done. And then she gets on the train and she spots this guy who's carrying some sort of stuffed toy dog, and when it's her turn to get off from the station closest to her work, this guy also happens to be getting off, and she sort of becomes a bit sort of transfixed by the dog. So as they've left the station and they're walking down the street, and she's sort of following him. She's not stalking him. She's not going out of her way to get to work, but she is following him. And then we get a sort of a 3-panelled narrative, which I will read, but 3 different things. So her sort of direct thing is glancing at watch, missing time, glancing, missing, approaching work, and dreading, suppressing dreading. I will make myself a coffee, I decide. Let that routine calm me, warm me, wake me. Although I feel awake and alert and don't actually agree that coffee gets me alert. And then this, at the same time as she's walking down the street towards her office, this is her sort of brain at work on what is it about this toy dog. Wonder where Dogman is heading. Maybe it's his job, some sort of film runner, delivering a dog for a scene with a spoilt child. Or maybe it's for his son. Or maybe it's just his and he likes to take it out to let it see it can't see. And then the third one is another woman pedestrian, bearing white, avoiding cycle path, a woman eating a croissant, walking, pastry in her hair, replaced by a teenager boy with a suitcase and peeling belt around his blue jeans, although it does shake me up. So she's got these 3 different thoughts of her own sort of obsession and awareness of what her body's doing, the bloke she's following wondering what is this toy dog, it's so sort of out of place, and then sort of peripheral vision of these other pedestrians passing her. And what I love about this is how our minds work. What I don't like about so much conventional literature is that it's sort of a linear one track of thought in any one character. And that's not how we operate. That's not how we work. We have all these sorts of thoughts sort of overriding each other, cascading on each other. Some blot others out. Some we grasp for and can't reach. And she does this brilliantly, starting with that so immersive of the whole body coming together into consciousness after a night's sleep. And the other thing I like about it is that there are places, and only in places, this is not all the way through, where you can read the text both down for one train of thought, but also there's some interesting sort of almost like Burroughs cut up by reading it across. So she's in a shop buying a packet of crisps, So, talking about the shopkeeper, his phone facing up is playing a video, camera looming in on a giant pus-filled spot on a leg, back, arm, hard to tell. Someone gloved beginning to apply pressure on the mound, me avoiding sight of the exploding growth on his phone. Turning round, heading out, Dorf saying farewell. And then what this guy is doing, what the shopkeeper's doing, ringing up the crisp, digit by digit, him, that will be 70p. Corner shops always have that authentic ringing sound. Me, everywhere else, it's sifting coins. Just an idea, 50p, 10p, 2 5p's. Me, here you go, him, thanks madam. So that's each of their sort of streams of thought and speech. But in places it reads across in a really interesting way. His phone facing up, ringing up the crisps. It's playing a video, camera looming in, digit by digit. Him, that will be 70p. On a giant pus-filled spot on a leg. Corner shops always have that. Back, arm, hard to tell. Someone authentic ringing sound. Me, gloved, beginning to apply pressure. Everywhere else it's sifting coins. So again, I love that sort of stuff. This is not done gratuitously. This is done very careful thought, because even within this, there are different registers of thought and how things are laid out on the page, which each one has been very carefully thought through and laid out as to, yes, it's important that it reads across as well as reads down, or no, this is only going to read down, all that sort of stuff. So, I really like this book. I did feel, as brilliantly as it started, once she got to the office, she's basically clock watched because she doesn't want to be there. She doesn't need to have a job that would take her 8 hours of the day. It's a dead end job. It's a filing clerk job. So she's wasting a lot of time in trips to the bathroom, trips to make tea, and counting down the seconds till she can go and have lunch, and all of this. And it's quite dull, even in Manchester to be laid out as it is. So I did think the beginning was strong. I also think that reflects the origins of this book were in a short story. It won the White Review Short Story Prize. And, from what I can gather, it's through a section in the middle of the book, when she's at the office, is the original short story, or based on the original short story. And then it's all expanded out. And normally that spells disaster. But that beginning was so good. I thought, no, this is going to work for the length of the book. And it doesn't quite sustain, as I say, because a lot of the office stuff is really quite boring, and there are times when some fairly random stuff is thrown in. For example, she suddenly starts wondering about viewing paintings in an art gallery. She's not in an art gallery, she's just imagining it, and that seems just a bit gratuitous, a bit of sort of space filler. And after her workday has ended and she meets up with her boyfriend, who she hasn't told about the assault, and she's trying to determine whether this is the night that she's going to tell him or not. And in places that was quite tender, but in other places it didn't really work, because the whole point, I think, about this structure is it's the trauma that is literally sort of expressed in her, every cell in her body, every fibre. She feels it. And when she's with her boyfriend, even though she's got this suppressed trauma, it's actually quite a nice thing. It's quite sort of ordinary and tender, and they sort of share a bag of chips from a chip shop, and they go and hear some bad poetry at a poetry recital, and they go home and they both chain their bikes up. So it's all rather sort of intimate and nice and quite sort of cosy, really, which doesn't really fit with the kind of the rest of the book. But I got so much out of particularly the two instances, representative instances of what I read, that sort of reading across as well as reading down, and the triple sort of voice of one mind at work. That I was won over by this. 4.5 stars. And on to Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This is my first Virginia Woolf, believe it or not. I've never read her before. And it was a buddy read with Jason over at Old Blues Chapter and Verse, and Cedar, who has just started her own channel, and we should go and support her. I will post the link to her channel in the notes. So what did I make of Mrs. Dalloway? I thought at the sentence level, the level of the sentence, it was superb. There's some fantastically evocative writing in here. So the way the book starts, of Mrs. Dalloway emerging from her flat out onto the London street, and this sense of bustle and purpose and London moving forward, and Woolf skips from sort of consciousness to consciousness to consciousness across all these different people, different perspectives. I was absolutely swept away by that. It was so evocative, and interestingly, in the quieter moments, such as there's a lunch scene between Mrs. Dalloway's husband and another MP with a rich sort of grandee lady who's hosting them. And there's no movement, it's very stiff and formal because this is a high status lunch. And that actually compares very badly for the reader, I feel, compared with the energy of most of the other sections. And interestingly, when that dinner party ends and the two MPs step out of her house and they're going towards a jewellery shop, they're back in the streets of London pounding the pavements, and the energy picks up again, and the descriptions pick up again, and the impressions pick up again. So I thought that was very much the strength of the book. For me, as a whole, though, above the level of the sentence, at the level of the book, the whole text, it was rather more disappointing than that. I couldn't quite figure out what this was about. It was a book about, amongst other things, class. And Mrs. Dalloway and her MP husband represent the upper classes. This is set in 1920, early 20s, so after the First World War, but before the Second World War, when Britain is starting to readjust. It's slightly more impoverished by the First World War. But it's not post-Second World War when you had the sort of decolonisation. But I think that is sort of hinted at in here. So I think there's an element of class analysis and obviously sort of feminism and the role of women in the book. But it seems to be, it does cover characters from across all the classes. And there's this thing, when I said it was sort of jumping from consciousness to consciousness to consciousness, there seems to be a suggestion from Woolf that all the people are linked spatially because they're all in these streets in London. But they're also linked sort of at a higher level by they're all moving under the same clouds, or there's a plane flying through the air that is repeated, described in the experience of the different characters, because they're all experiencing that aspect of the same thing, although obviously they have different personal and individual experiences of their loves and losses and all this sort of stuff. I didn't buy that, I'm afraid. I did not buy that, because it seemed to me that the class analysis rather worked against that, because although she does cover all classes, they have nothing in common. They only spatially coincide when the maid prepares the lunch for Mrs. Bruton and her two MPs, or the maid is assisting Mrs. Dalloway preparing for her party, which is the apotheosis of this book. So the only time they spatially coincide, the upper and the working classes, is when the upper classes are employing the working classes to do something for them. So in fact they may as well not be in the same city. And one of the characters, who's a bit of a sort of frumpy, dowdy religious type who befriends Mrs. Dalloway's daughter, it's like she sort of ruminates on, her lack of existence once she's outside of this house. So that's how Mrs. Dalloway sees her, that she only has existence when she's under her roof with her daughter. And it's all I find all that very unsatisfactory. And that Septimus Smith, who's someone who's shell-shocked from World War One, and ends up committing suicide. It's not really a spoiler, because I think everyone knows that. It seems like he, as a working class man who fought for the ideals of Britain in the First World War, he has to sacrifice himself and kill himself in order for Mrs. Dalloway to be able to have her right to host a dinner party, or not a dinner party, host a party for the upper classes. So that is built off the back of the working classes, both literally that they've prepared all the meal and done all the cleaning, but also metaphorically that Septimus Smith dies instead of Mrs. Dalloway, who otherwise would die inside because she's a late middle-aged woman who's wondering what her purpose in life is. And it's only this party that sort of reignites her joie de vivre and will to live. But the other problem is the party itself is just, it's so upper class. Yes, some of the servants are mentioned in passing, but it's really about the upper classes and their love life, which I didn't care about. There's a character in here called Peter Walsh, who had a crush on Mrs. Dalloway when they were young and single, went unrequited. She marries her husband, who becomes the MP. Peter Walsh goes off on colonial service in India, and he's come back after 5 years with he's engaged to be married, but he still has this sort of light for Clarissa Dalloway. And I didn't care. I found him the most self-indulgent, unlikable character, and a big part of the dinner scene sorry, I keep calling it dinner. The big part of the party scene is, what's he going to do? Is he going to pledge his undying love for Clarissa? And I just didn't care. And another character in that party scene is called Sally Seaton, who was Clarissa's best friend, again, when they were teenagers and going into their early 20s. And Sally Seaton was this sort of wild, spirited thing, and, may or may not have had a lesbian affair with the young Clarissa. And then she sort of drops off the map, and she only reappears in the book in the party when she drops in unannounced. And you think, oh, we're going to get some sort of revelation or something interesting. But no, she just sort of sits there on the sofa while we get this Peter Walsh stuff. And again, it's like, blimey, what happened to you? You were this fabulous character in the flashback reminiscences of Mrs. Dalloway, and Peter Walsh to some extent, and now you almost can't talk for yourself. It was an odd read, really. As I say, at the level of the sentence, it's unbelievably good, but as a whole, I didn't really buy into it. I'm definitely going to read something else. I think I'll read The Waves, because everyone seems to suggest that's her best book. So I'm going to give that a try, probably next year, and see where we get to. And finally, Daylight by Roya Marsh, who is a lesbian and obviously a person of colour. And she starts off here with a little autobiographical sort of explanatory note, that she was abused as a child, that she is what she self-proclaimed Butch Dyke. And, she gives a little bit of her personal history in here. And that's fine, but the poem's just, wow. I enjoyed Justin Philip Reed's collection, the Malevolent volume, but this is on another plane altogether. This is extraordinary. Every poem is called In Broad Daylight, Black ... Look ... So in this case, this is In Broad Daylight, Black Activists Look Gunshot. In a conversation about the 50th anniversary of MLK Jr.'s assassination, my father says, "They don't kill no one important in the US no more." And how easy he forgets. How a happy home dies in a snapshot. How language is loaded. How I was raised loaded for bear. How he had been a half-cocked father. How my brother got swallowed by a barrel. How that's his own forgotten blood, not even 10 years gone. How gaping the vacancy beside my mother at his funeral. How he go exit wound whenever he see fit. How he sweat bullets when we question his absence. How I'm short-tempered straight shooter triggered to go ballistic. How he return ready with silence at any time I shoot off my mouth. How he the reason I ain't never been no stranger to the business end of a gun. How he ain't never mean no harm, he just shooting the breeze. I found that poem so powerful through the constant referring back to of gun imagery. And it's bookended before it is. It's sort of set out as a poem, but it's not really. It's I suppose it's concrete poetry of, lots of views of why people want guns, and then after that poem, it's similar, and it's why people would never have a gun, which is kind of interesting in and of itself. But that poem is just a kick to the absolute solar plexus. It's extraordinary. And then this is called In Broad Daylight, Black Daughters Look Gossip. And before I read it, there's that book, something, Black Women Go to Church or something, which is a book of short stories. I haven't read it, I can't comment on it. But when I read this, I thought, I don't need to read that book. This is the shit, okay? This is called In Broad Daylight, Black Daughters Look Gossip. No one in my church knows my father, but I carry his name. Head bowed in prayer, in shame, in offering empty palms turned up at the altar. I am nothing more than his daughter, begging another man I have never seen for mercy, for love, for saving. There is never a good enough lie to tell. The truth is always gone. I am a lonely audience while the choir hums and the congregation peers over their shoulder. They say, "Neighbour," and the air whispers lonely. The whispers whisper, "Come forth." No one whispers, "Forgive," so I don't. I just carry my void on my shoulders. At the dance, on paper, on my tithes, on my wedding day, on my smile. Everyone says that's my best feature, says it lights up a room, could light up the sky. I think that kind of metaphor is what killed Christ. I was born and named and left. This smile was born with a window. All my sacred keeps slipping right through, and I just let it. Ain't no sense in chasing what ain't trying to be caught. That goes for liquors, that goes for lovers, that goes for leavers. Remember, no one in my church knows my Father, they just know his name, and pray my strength in his name. But this name is mine, and all its history, this smile is mine, and all its fissures. What comes and goes from my mouth will have been crafted of my own legend. And who I choose to worship is the one facing me in the mirror of my own altar. This is such a knockout collection. This is absolutely 5 stars. I highly recommend it. I first saw it on Matthew Sharappa's channel, and he said it was his first 5-star read of the year. It's not my first 5-star read of the year, but in terms of emotional punch, it's absolutely my primary 5-star read of the year. So there you have it. 3 books. Little Scratch by Rebecca Watson, 4.5 stars. Daylight by Roya Marsh, 5 stars. And Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, which I think I forgot to actually mention, I gave 4 stars to, for the quality of the writing rather than the book as a whole. I have read one other book which gets a video all of its own because it's 30 minutes talking about 880 pages worth of novel. So I haven't quite decided when I'm going to publish them, in what order, and maybe on the same date. I don't know. But until then, next time, thanks very much.